Washington's redeclared war on terror also has limited resonance in other regions, in Iraq, for example. The Iraqi people need no lessons on the topic of terrorism. The Bush administration's former special envoy for Afghanistan explains. They have lost more compatriots to the scourge over the past year than Americans have in all the terrorist incidents of their history combined. Relative to population, Iraq suffers every month, sometimes every week, losses comparable to those of the September 11, 2001 attacks inflicted on the United States. Unfortunately, Iraqis are as likely to attribute those losses to the U.S.-sponsored war on terrorism as to the terrorists themselves. Some possible reasons come to mind. One, perhaps, is that they are aware, as is surely the Director of International Security and Defense Policy at the RAND Corporation, that increases in terror and chaos were widely anticipated consequences of the invasion of Iraq. Apparently, there will be some barriers to the maturation of the proto-science of democracy promotion. Some of the more careful scholarship that jumps on the bandwagon does intimate that something may be amiss. That includes the scholarly articles cited at the outset of this chapter. Jonathan Montan's study of the roots of the Bush Doctrine, after invoking the conventional mantra, observes that it is not entirely an innovation. Throughout American history, democracy promotion has been central to U.S. political identity and sense of national purpose, and to the way the United States defines its political interests. It has been the heart of American exceptionalism. Montan's lengthy and careful review of this defining property of American exceptionalism skirts any evidence that the policy was ever pursued, keeping to numerous declarations. A footnote explains that at issue are not the historical facts, but the extent to which the United States' historical perception of itself as exceptional has influenced foreign policy, more accurately, influenced its rhetorical framework. So understood, promotion of democracy is central to Bush strategy, in a kind of postmodern interpretation, in which we restrict attention to narrative and text, recoiling from truth, perhaps a social construction. Of the articles cited, only Caterina de la Couras makes an effort to provide some reasons to believe that democracy promotion actually guided policy, restricting herself to the Bush II years and the Middle East. Apart from rhetoric, she gives several examples. The Bush administration's encouragement of economic liberalization, which for the region means effective takeover of the economies by Western corporate power. New radio stations aimed at initiating younger audiences into American culture and winning them over to American values. Comment unnecessary. The invasion of Iraq, to which we will turn directly, and several specific measures that she criticizes because, though introduced with much fanfare, they were much like earlier ones and were scarcely funded. She also criticizes the inconsistency in U.S. efforts at democracy promotion, which leads to a problem of credibility, her emphasis. Namely, the strong line of continuity that Carruthers found, which in reality is highly consistent. Somehow, the persistence of these policies through the Bush years leads to skepticism in the Middle East about Washington's motives, and to the search for a hidden agenda. For example, to help Israel control the Palestinians, to control Iraqi oil fields, or generally to extend American hegemony. But de la Coura argues, conventionally, this is an inaccurate description of the U.S. position, and that the Bush administration is serious about democracy. All that is missing is evidence. Carruthers predicted with regret that Washington's Iraq policies would extend the strong line of continuity. They will likely exhibit similar contradictions between stated principles and political reality. His predictions were being fulfilled as his book went to press. The occupation authorities worked assiduously to avert the threat of democracy, but were compelled, with great reluctance, to abandon their plans to impose a constitution and to prevent elections. Few competent observers would disagree with the editors of the Financial Times that the reason the elections of January 2005 took place was the insistence of the Grand Ayatollah Ali Sistani, who vetoed 3 schemes by the U.S.-led occupation authorities to shelve or dilute them. Middle East scholar Alan Richards observes that although the United States initially opposed early elections in Iraq, after Ayatollah Sistani turned huge numbers of his followers out in the streets to demand such elections, Washington had little choice but to agree. The Wall Street Journal explained that Sistani gave his marching orders, spread the word that Ayatollah Sistani insists that the new government be chosen through a direct election, not by the U.S. or U.S.-appointed Iraqi leaders, as Washington had sought. Veteran correspondent Patrick Coburn adds that it was only when it became clear that the U.S. could not withstand a Shia uprising that elections turned out to have been an immediate American goal all along. Once it became clear that U.S. and U.K. efforts to bar elections could not be sustained, the invaders, of course, took credit for them. The elections and the background soon settled comfortably into the American-sponsored electoral process, much as the Israel-Palestine peace process that the United States had impeded for 30 years has been transmuted into the halting American-led process to make peace between Israelis and Palestinians. In Iraq, though compelled to tolerate elections, the occupying forces sought to subvert them. The U.S. candidate, Iyad Allawi, was given every possible advantage, state resources, and access to TV, as well as the support of the military occupation. He ran a distant third, with about 12% of the vote. To ensure that elections would be free, the most important independent media were expelled from the country, notably the Qatar-based channel Al Jazeera, which is despised by the ruling tyrants in the region because it has been a leading force for democratization in the Arab world. That alone makes its presence before elections in Iraq inappropriate, and the background tells us more about the nature of the Messianic mission. For years, high officials, Cheney, Rumsfeld, Rice, Powell, had pressured Qatar to curtail the channel's reporting. The United States bombed its facilities in Kabul and Baghdad, killing a Jordanian correspondent there. U.S. pressure was so intense, according to a senior Qatari official, that the government is accelerating plans to put Al Jazeera on the market, though Bush administration officials counter that a privately owned station in the region may be no better from their point of view. We thus have another demonstration of the Bush vision of democracy in the Middle East. No media can be tolerated that are not under U.S. control, whether public or private. Also very familiar practice and entirely understandable. Washington complains that Al Jazeera inflamed opinion by direct reporting that emphasized civilian casualties during the U.S. destruction of Fallujah, and that it reports passionately about the Palestinian conflict. Another departure from journalistic standards is that the channel showed taped messages by Osama bin Laden, which are apparently considered newsworthy in the Muslim world, as they are among people everywhere concerned with the threat of terror. There was much derision, along with sober expressions of concern over Moscow's moves to tighten state control over the news media, when Russia barred ABC News after it recorded an interview with the Chechen leader, who has ordered or carried out some of the worst terrorist acts in the country's history, including the school siege in Beslan that left 330 people dead. Such selective reactions are standard practice, sometimes reaching extraordinary levels. Thus, Nicaragua, under intense U.S. attack, was bitterly condemned for censorship, with scrupulous care to suppress the fact that its major newspaper was openly supporting overthrow of the government by terrorist forces of the superpower that was also funding the journal. The condemnation kept under wraps the incomparably worse record of Washington's Israeli client at the